All right. Welcome, everyone, to What's Changing on January 26th. I'm Teresa Chang, Marketing Promotion Specialist here at Satori Software, and your moderator for this webinar. Let's begin with some housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to send them over. You can submit them in the questions box on your right. We'll try to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. However, if we don't get around to answering all of them, we'll make sure to follow up with those ones afterwards. Also, this session is being recorded and will be available under the Learn section on our website. Okay, joining us today is Kim Mock. She has a decade of experience absorbing the ins and outs of effective mailing preparation and submission processes, with a heavy emphasis on new USPS technologies, including intelligent mail and electronic documentation. In her current role as Postal Product Specialist here at Satori Software, Kim educates customers on how to efficiently meet the latest USPS regulations. She has presented at MailCom, NPS, and many other educational forums, which includes full-day channel training sessions, online webinars, much like this one, and high-profile customer training programs. For today's session, Kim will shed some insight on what regulatory changes mailers can expect on January 26th. USPS may have postponed full service for now, but with prices going up an average of 5.9% this month, any efficiency can be a huge advantage. We'll look at the proposed new prices and sortations, including the new first-class mail residual pricing structure and FSS changes. Since we have a lot to cover today, I'm going to hand it off to Kim.
All right, thanks, Teresa. So we do have quite a bit to cover today. Even without the full-service mandatory requirement going into effect later this month, the Post Office actually is going to be introducing quite a few new features for mailers starting at the end of the month here. And so we're going to go ahead and try and get as many of those covered here today as we can. If you have any questions, feel free to send them over. We'll be able to address kind of more specific questions at the end of the session today. So first we're going to talk about the price increases and how we got to the number of 5.9%, which is a pretty big jump in the mailing costs for everybody this year. We're going to talk a little bit about some opportunities in the way that the Post Office has announced those prices. And we'll talk about all of the new sorting rules. So there are some pretty significant changes to the way that your mail will be prepared starting on January 26th. And we'll talk about each of those in turn. We'll cover a little bit about the full service postponement and what we expect to see with that going forward, because just because they're not requiring it now doesn't mean they won't require it in the future. And we'll also talk a little bit about how you'll be able to apply these changes if you're a Satori Software customer. So I know one of the big questions that you'll probably have is, okay, how do I get these changes integrated into my software? And we'll talk about that as well. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So if you have any specific questions, we'll be able to address those then. So first, let's talk a little bit about where we're at with the pricing. The general idea is that across each mail class, the prices are going up an average of 5.9%. So that means for all of the mail that's considered first class, it averages out to be about a 5.9% increase. Now, each of the different rate cells that are available for that mail class will vary on how much it's going to be going up, but on average, it'll be about 5.9%. Now, this does seem rather high for a standard mail price increase. That we've been expecting, a price increase every year ever since they passed the PAEA, the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act, back in 2006. We've been getting pretty consistent price increases every year that are based off of the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index cap. So basically, the rates have been rising at the rate of inflation. Now, this year, when the Post Office announced their inflation-capped price increase, which was about 1.3%, they actually, I'm sorry, 1.6%, they actually needed a little bit more just to break even. So what they did is they actually filed a separate price increase that they call exigency. An exigency is just a fancy lawyer term for something that happens in extreme circumstances. So this is basically they're saying that because of the recession that was not foreseeable by the post office, the post office is claiming that they would like to raise their rates an additional 4.3% on top of that 1.6% for the inflation cap. Now the PRC deliberated over this for many months, and they actually ruled on that exigency filing on Christmas Eve. And that happened right around 5 o'clock, about 4 or 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve. And so that was a Merry Christmas, I guess, to the post office. They approved the exigency filing, but they approved it in really an interesting way. So that the way that the post office had filed the exigency increase is basically they would be rolling that 4.3% into all of the prices going on for the rest of eternity. So basically that 4.3% would be rolled in every single year for the foreseeable future until someday when they redo the way that rates are calculated. Now the PRC wasn't too fond of that idea, and so basically what they said was they had calculated the amount of money that the post office lost due to the recession, and basically said that the post office should be able to recover the difference there in about 2 years. And so basically this exigency filing, this extra 4.3%, is actually something that will only be applied for about 2 years, basically until the post office can report that they've made up the amount of money that the PRC has calculated there. And then at that point, the post office will actually be required to roll back that price increase. So, so this 4.3% is actually going to be a temporary increase and not something that's going to go on forever. So that's actually some pretty good news for mailers, even though the 4.3% is going to hurt a little bit in the short term. It'll be a little bit better as we go forward. So again, each mail class is going to increase about 5.9%. Again, it's not really specific to each rate cell. It's something that's going to happen at the mail class level and not at the mail piece level. So let's talk a little bit more about how this is going to affect each mail class. So for first class mail, again, that average is going to be 5.9%. Now the rate cell that actually got the least amount of increase was single piece postcards. And so these are going to be those postcards that you would send to your friend if you're vacationing in Florida or something along those lines. But they actually only went up 1 cent, which is about 3%. So, so that was the rate category that got the least increase. The one that actually got the highest increase, interestingly enough, was automation 5-digit flats. So that was really interesting. It went up 4.5 cents, which is actually an 11% increase, which is pretty high for even though we've averaged out to about 6%. Now, even with that highest increase being at the 5-digit flat letter rate, generally, most of the prices were increased more for flat size mail than for letter size mail. So the interesting thing that the post office is kind of telling mailers by doing this is the post office wants more letter size mail and not as much flat size mail. And that's not really a shock to most of us in the industry these days. The post office does have a lot of efficiency problems processing that flat size mail. And so that it's not really shocking that they're doing this, but it was pretty overt in the way that they stated all these prices, that they definitely want to have more mailers sending letter size mail rather than flat size mail. So then let's talk a little bit about standard mail. And again, for standard mail, the average increase was about 5.9% across all the different rate categories that are available. And this is actually kind of interesting, is that the lowest increase for standard mail actually came from flats. So that only raised about 1.6 cents, which is almost a 4% increase rather than a 6% increase. So, so that was kind of an interesting thing that they had listed there. Another thing that was interesting is that the rate category that raised the highest was actually in marketing parcels. and that's for marketing parcels that are entered at the SCF. That actually went up 14.6%. So that was actually a pretty interesting message that they're sending to the standard mailers. Now, the interesting thing here is that the flat rates for standard mail didn't go up as significantly as the flat rates for first-class mail. And we'll talk a little bit more about why this is happening. And the reason is because standard mail is actually available to be processed on the new flat sorting machines called FSS. And we'll talk a little bit more about FSS here as we go throughout the session today. So I'm not going to go too much into the periodical pricing because it gets really complicated when you take into account the piece price along with the sack price and the bundle charges and the pallet charges. And so it's really difficult to see exactly what's happening there. But again, for periodicals, that average is going to be about a 5.9% increase. Also for any of your outside things like bound printed matter, medium mail, and library mail, those are all going up 5.9% on average as well. So there were a couple things that happened as I was going through all of these different rates that were kind of interesting things that were signals that the post office is sending to mailers. And the first one is the way that they chose how to apply the prices for EDDM mail. So this is going to be your saturation mail where you're basically sending a mail piece to every single person in a specific carrier's route. Now, if you drop that EDDM mail off at a retail facility, so if you're dropping that off at just like a local post office and not at a BMEU, you're not required to have a permit or anything like that with the post office in order to submit that mail. However, that retail price actually went up about 9%, which is pretty significant. However, if you do drop at a BMEU and you're just dropping it as a normal mail with your permit and everything like that, that rate actually only went up 5%. So that's kind of an interesting message that the post office is sending, that they actually prefer that EDDM mail be dropped off at the business mail entry unit and not at a retail facility. And I think the post office is learning that those mailers who are dropping off at a BMEU and that have a permit are just a little bit more sophisticated. They're preparing that mail a little bit better. The carriers like that mail a little bit more. And so they didn't increase the rates that much for those type of pieces. So another thing that they did is they introduced a new rate level for first-class single-piece mail. So if you're mailing just first-class pieces, but you use if you use a permit of some kind, so either a permit imprint or a metered permit, or you have some pre-canceled stamps that you're using, you actually get a 1-cent discount on your single-piece mail. So that's actually a nice thing for those of you who already have a permit. Again, it's a signal to all the mailers that the post office finds it easier to process that mail that's processed by someone who has a permit, who's a little bit more sophisticated than someone who's just dropping something off in the blue box. Also, if you remember last year, there was a lot of confusion about what to do with residual first-class letters. So if you've prepared a regular automation first-class mailing, and you have some pieces that are left over at the end of that sort that you wouldn't be able to claim non-automation rates for, and you just want to send them out with the mailing and you're paying a single piece rate. There was some confusion about how that was calculated last year, and so they've actually added some new options this year to hopefully reduce some of that confusion. I don't know how well they did with it, but we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Another thing that they did in this price filing is they actually announced several mailing incentives. And I know this is kind of a little bit of an eye chart here. There's quite a bit going on, but basically the post office is experimenting with lots of different ways to apply discounts to a mailing in ways that will help to increase the value of the mail. So basically, if you're willing to try some of the new technologies in mail piece design, then you will actually be eligible for some discounts on the mail that you're preparing. So It could be anywhere from a cent or two a piece to a couple percentage points off the entire mailing. It kind of depends on which incentive you're applying there. Each one kind of has its own rules. Now, the very first one that's going to go into effect here is going to start here on February 1st, and that's what's called the Branded Color Mobile Technology Incentive. And basically what that is if you print a QR code on your mail piece, and it has many colors that are involved in the creation of that QR code, and it has some branding attached to it. So for example, if you put your logo in the center of that QR code or something along those lines, then you can actually be eligible for a 2% discount off your entire mailing. So that's actually a pretty good deal. That's going to be available for standard mail and for first class. And that incentive is going to be available from February through to the end of March. So if you're starting to plan your mailings for February and March and you're considering putting a QR code on your mail piece, I would definitely recommend looking into the color options for printing, getting that QR code branded, and then you'll get a little bit of a discount off of your mail. Now you'll see that we have several different additional mailing incentives that are scheduled. There's going to be quite a few in the second quarter of the year from April to June there. There's quite a few that are going to be available towards the end of the year as well. Probably the one that I do want to point out here is going to be first the mail and digital personalization, and that's going to be available from May to June this year. That one's going to be available if you have if the mail piece itself is personalized, so it says, Dear John, thank you for stopping by our store on Saturday, or something along those lines. And then it also has a link to a mobile website that's also personalized. So if they click a QR code, or if they go to a personalized URL that's linked off of that mail piece, and then the website itself is also personalized to John, then you can get an additional discount off of your mail that way. So all these mailing incentives are going to be, we'll probably cover those in future webinars, and we can also, we'll also be putting up some tech notes about each of these different mailing incentives. So if you're curious about each of these, feel free to visit our website. We'll be putting those up as the post office clarifies the terms for each of these. So now let's go ahead and take a look at all of the different sortation changes that are going to be happening over the next year. And the first one that we're going to talk about is going to be for all of the first class mailings. So most of these are going to be specific to first class letters. And the first one that we talked about a little bit already is this new single piece mail price. Now they're calling it meter, which is actually a really difficult term because it actually has nothing to do with whether you have a meter machine or not. And basically what it is this new first class single piece letter price is going to be available for anyone who pays using some kind of an account with the post office. So you could have a permanent imprint account. You could have a meter machine where you pay for your mail using the meter machine and the meter strips there. You could be using pre-canceled stamps. Or if you use the PC postage system that the post office has through their website, then basically you can send any letter-sized piece at 1 cent lower than the retail stamp price. So you wouldn't be actually purchasing a retail stamp. You would be purchasing the rate of a letter piece, but it would be 1 cent less than that retail stamp. So that's actually a pretty nice thing if you already have an account with the post office, and say, for example, if you don't use that account to apply it to any of your single piece mail, I would definitely recommend looking into that because 1 cent per piece can add up definitely over the course of the year. Now the next option that they added for first class letters is going to be this new option for residual mail. So this is going to be for any of the mail that's left over after you've done an automation or a non-automation sort. So for example, if you sort all of your barcoded mail to automation rates and you have a couple pieces that are left over at the end there, it used to be last year that you would pay this residual price that was actually 2 cents more than the retail stamp price. And that was a little bit difficult for those of us who mail letters that are under 1 ounce. It was kind of difficult to take that you would actually be paying more for those additional pieces. But in that area, you'd be able to mail up to 2 ounces for that, for just a couple pennies more. Now, the post office heard that there was a lot of confusion about when do you apply the blended rate, how do you combine the 1 ounce and the 2 ounce pieces, how do you do all this stuff. And so what they did was, rather than roll back to the previous system, they actually added a new option. And so basically what this is if you have mail that's left over at the end of a sort and all of it is 1 ounce mail, then you'll pay the 1 ounce meter price, which is that 1 cent discount off of the stamp price for that 1 ounce mail. If all of your residual mail is 2 ounces, then you would pay the 2 ounce price. Now, if you have a combination of both 1 ounce and 2 ounce mail all in the same mailing and it's all left over after you've done all of your automation mail there, then you can actually combine your 1 ounce and your 2 ounce pieces and pay the blended price, which is again that 2 cents more than the meter price, or you can separate them out into 1 tray of 1 ounce mail and 1 tray of 2 ounce mail, and you can pay the 1 ounce and the 2 ounce prices for those pieces. And so, so there'll be options in your software for you to select which way you want to combine that mail, whether you want to combine it or separate it and pay the separate prices. Now let's talk a little bit about the other mail classes. So the biggest change probably for mailers of flats is going to be the requirement of FSS preparation. So before we get into what the preparation is, let's talk a little bit about what FSS is and what it means for mailers. So FSS stands for the Flat Sequencing System, and these are huge sorting machines that they have installed at the larger sorting facilities throughout the country. Each of these machines is about the size of a football field, and basically what it does is it takes those flats and it actually sorts them to the carrier route order that's required for the carrier route as they go throughout their route for the day. So this is really similar to the DPS systems that they have for letters, and this is just going to be a different machine that sorts the same order but for flats. So each of these machines, like I said, is very large. So there are actually about 99 FSS machines that are in production today, and they've been installed across 47 locations across the country. So not every area has an FSS machine that sorts to it. Only certain areas have that capability to be able to sort to those areas. Now, the post office has been offering FSS preparation as an option to mailers for several years now. However, the adoption of the FSS preparation hasn't been very high because obviously it hasn't been mandated. So they've decided to go ahead and mandate that starting here on January 26th. So if you're if you're a flat mailer and you send standard mail, periodicals, or bound printed matter, then you would be required to prepare your mail for these flat machines in those areas where a flat machine or the FSS machine is installed. Now, if you are going to be sending mail to those locations where the FSS machines are active, you will see a pretty dramatic change in the way that your mail is sorted. So if you look at your qualification reports at all, if you check out how many sacks you have and the rates that you pay and everything like that, it will change the way that your mail is sorted. So if you are a flat mailer today and you start noticing that your qualification reports are different starting on January 26th, this is probably why. You're probably going to be sending mail to an FSS location, and then that's why your mail is being prepared differently. And you may be paying different rates. And sometimes, in some cases, those rates will be lower, and sometimes those cases will be higher. It just depends on the makeup of your mail. So let's talk a little bit more about how FSS is prepared. So basically, what you're going to be doing is first, you would be separating out all of the mail that's destined to the zip codes that are processed by those FSS machines. So basically what you'll do is the sort engine will actually manage most of this for you. It'll take all of the mail that's going to those zip codes that are processed by those FSS machines and putting it together and sorting it differently from the rest of your mail. So each of these FSS machines will have several times that they're run throughout the day, and each run will run a specific set of zip codes. So, for example, at one facility, you may have a machine that runs 5 times through the day. So it has 5 different runs, and the post office uses several terms to refer to these runs. They could call it a scheme, they could call it a sort plan, or sometimes they just call it a run of the machine. So if you hear the term FSS scheme, it just means one run of that machine as they go throughout the day, and it's going to process a specific set of zip codes. So as far as the sorting process goes, your software is actually going to bundle all of your FSS mail into those schemes and then place them onto FSS pallets when they're required. And then anything that can't fit on the pallet will also be prepared in FSS sacks if there's enough volume there. And then you may see some FSS bundles in your regular sacks as well. So it kind of depends on how many of your pieces are actually destined to those FSS locations. Now, probably the most confusing thing about FSS is how the prices to those pieces are applied. So for each FSS bundle, you can actually have pieces that have several different rates that are actually part of that bundle. So you could have a bundle of, say, 100 pieces, and maybe 150 of those are going at a carrier route rate, and the other 50 are going at a 5-digit rate. Where for most mail, you can actually tell what the price of the piece is going to be by the container. So either the bundle or the sack that it's in will actually tell you what the price is. That's actually not true for FSS mail, because all of the mail for those zip codes is all combined into the same bundle. So it's a little bit confusing. Again, you'll definitely be seeing changes to your qualification reports if you're mailing to any of those facilities that have an FSS machine. So don't be surprised when your mailing's sorted a little bit differently. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other changes that are going to be applied that are going to be a little bit less disruptive for you. The first is that if you're using electronic documentation and you're doing full service or anything like that, there are going to be new versions of the electronic documentation formats that will be available. And these new versions will support all of the new properties and all of the new settings that are required for these new sortations. So if you're mailing for January 26th or after, we do recommend using the most current version of your electronic documentation. If you're using bulk mailer and you're using mail.xml, we'll automatically switch over to that mail.xml 15.0 for you, so you don't have to think about it. If you're using mail.dat, you'll actually be able to select whether you're using 14.1 or if you're using the older 13-2, or I'm sorry, the 13-1 format for mail.dat. So again, we definitely recommend always using the most current version of eDoc when you're submitting that to the post office. Now, there is a new zone that's going to be defined for periodicals, bound printed matter, and priority mail. And this is going to be called Zone 9. Now, this actually won't be affecting most customers because it's only a specific set of 5-digit zip codes. So Zone 9 is actually going to be mail that's headed to some of the U.S. properties that are not considered states, and then it's not Guam or Puerto Rico. We're talking about little tiny states like the Federated States of Micronesia. Palau is one of the islands that's going to be contained in this Zone 9 listing. And actually the rates that are applied to Zone 9 are the exact same rates that you see for Zone 8. So you won't see much change there. You won't see any change in your postage. There'll just be some pieces that are marked Zone 9 if you mail to those locations. Another thing that's going to be changing is the post office is going to be mandating the use of the Intelligent Mail Package barcode and the shipping services file for pretty much every parcel mailing. So if you do send parcels and you're not already using the shipping services file and the Intelligent Mail barcode for parcels, then we definitely recommend migrating that as soon as you can. That'll be required on January 26th as well. And of course, with all of these changes, the post office is updating their postage statements. So if you're still doing the physical postage statements, you will need to print out the new versions. And again, that'll just come out automatically in your software. So now let's talk a little bit about where we're at with full service. So last year, we spent most of the year really believing that full service was going to be a requirement here on January 26th. I know a lot of mailers did a lot of effort to make sure that they were migrated over properly and that everything was working the way it should, and I congratulate you if you've made that jump, because that was a really big effort, and it's a really good effort because you'll be ready for this whenever they do reactivate this deadline. So what happened is the PRC, the Postal Regulatory Commission, ruled back around Thanksgiving that that actually full service really is a rate change, because all of the different changes that are required in order to apply full service are a cost to a mailer. And so they did some calculation for what that rate change would be, and it didn't really cancel out any of the price increases that the post office wanted to have. And of course, the post office, as you know, is struggling financially right now, and so they couldn't afford to not raise their rates. And so basically, the post office backed off on their full service requirement. They have not announced a new mandatory date. So at this point, you can be pretty sure that full service will not be required throughout 2014. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next year or the year after that. We do know that at some point, full service will be required for the best rates. Right now, the discount that you get for full service is pretty small. It's $3 per thousand for first class, $1 per thousand for periodicals and standard mail. But it could be possible that they'll be increasing that discount in the future to try and get more mailers to adopt that process. There are several different ways that they could try and encourage mailers to migrate to full service. So if you've already made that transition, your work is not lost. You've actually done yourself a favor, because you've already gotten all of the processes in place so that when it is mandatory, you won't have to think about it. Now, if you haven't migrated to full service already, you can take a little bit of a deep breath. You don't have to panic as much as you may have if you hadn't migrated to full service. However, we do strongly encourage you to start looking at full service and start thinking about how you'll apply it, because we do think that the post office is going to mandate it in one way or another. It could be by changing the way the pricing structure is to make it more valuable to go to full service, or they could apply that mandate in the future and just consider it part of a rate increase. So let's talk a little bit about what you need to do if you're a Satori software customer. So if you're a Satori software customer and you have one of our mailing products, so we have several that are out on the market today. We have Satori Presort, we have Bulk Mailer, we have Satori Architect and Office, and we also have our Monticello suite. We definitely encourage you to install any and all updates as soon as you get them. So if you are not already on our email notification list for our product updates, you can just send a quick email off to accountinfo@satorisoftware.com and just let them know that you'd like to be notified of any product updates, and we'll get you on that list, and we'll send out an email as soon as any update is available. So the release for February, March, there will be a download available, and I believe the email for that is going out today or tomorrow. And so you should be able to download the February, March release. The February, March release for Bulk Mailer and the Satori Architect and Office products does not include the January 26 changes. We're actually in the process right now of finalizing the changes for the January 26 update. There were a lot of things that happened at the last minute. We got the final prices right there at Christmas Eve, and there's still some sortation questions that we brought out to the post office. So we're trying to get those integrated in as quickly as we can and also get them tested before we ship them out to you. So we will have some mandatory service packs that are available for each product. Again, we recommend that you apply those as soon as you get them. So as soon as you get that notification, apply that service pack. You'll get an email notification if you use Satori Architect or Office, and also Satori Presort. If you are using bulk mailer, you can use the Check for Live Update feature in bulk mailer to apply that service pack. So you can go to the Help menu and select Check for Live Update. There's also an option in the Options dialog there. So if you go to Tools and Options, there's an option there to notify me when an update is available. And if you check that box, it'll check every time you open up bulk mailer, it'll check to see if there's a new service pack available, and it'll notify you to apply that update. Now for, again, for Satori Architect Office and for bulk mailer, the pricing and the sortation that's applied is based on the mailing date. So as you're going throughout the wizard, there's the section there where you select your permit and you select the mailing date. That mailing date will determine whether you're going to use the January 26th prices or if you're going to use the prices that exist today. So make sure that that mailing date that you select for your mailing is correct. So any webinar wouldn't be complete without some resources. So we've got some different links here for you to take a look at here. The first is the link to get all of the new prices and postage statements. So if you would like to go through and calculate what your mailings are going to cost starting January 26th, then you can download, there's a pricing spreadsheet on the Postal Explorer website, and that's pe.usps.gov. The link's on the left-hand side of the page there. Also, there's a link there for the new postage statements, so if you want to see what those look like. There aren't terribly many drastic changes other than the addition of some FSS options in the postage statements. So those are available for download from the USPS site as well. Going to look at this information is not required, but I know that there are some mailers who are really wanting to know what their prices are going to be next year. Downloading that pricing spreadsheet will give you the tools you need to calculate what your rates are going to be. Now, there's a bunch of different links here for all the different Federal Register notices. So this includes the Federal Register notice for all the sortation changes for the mailing products. This includes the Federal Register notice postponing the full service requirement, and also the Federal Register notice for all of the changes for the Intelligent Mail Package barcode and that shipping services file. Also, again, if you're a Satori software customer and you want to take a look at what the status is of our different releases, which ones are available, take a look at the release notes, see what's going to be in each of these releases, then you can go to our Tech Notes section of our website. So if you just go to satorisoftware.com and under support, there's a link there for our Tech Notes. If you search for Fed Service Pack, you'll have a listing of all of the different Tech Notes that are associated with this update, and these are updated at a real-time basis. So this will tell you exactly when your service pack will be available, what features will be in that service pack, and whether you can apply it already or not. So that'll be your best place to see exactly where you're at with getting your updates. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand that back to Teresa.
Great, thanks, Kim. Before we dive into Q&A, I would like to mention that our next webinar, January 26th Aftermath, How Mailers Weathered the Storm, is scheduled for February 5th. Learn how these last-minute USPS changes have impacted the industry and see what else is coming up in July. To register, you can view our live webinar schedule. You can visit the Learn section on our website. Here you'll also find our previously recorded sessions that you can access on demand. Okay, we'll now open it up for Q&A. Like I mentioned earlier, we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. And if you have any questions after the webinar, feel free to contact our knowledgeable support team by phone or by email, and their contact information is listed on the screen in front of you. Looks like we have a lot of great questions. So will any part of full service be required to continue to qualify for pre-sort discounts?
And the good news for that is no. So if you, again, if you've already migrated to full service and you're already using eDoc and you're already using your unique barcodes, you can continue to do that today. So full service is not going away. The discount for full service still exists the same way it did last year. However, it's not going to be a requirement for automation rates. So if you haven't migrated to full service, you won't need to make that step immediately. Again, we do recommend that you make that transition as soon as possible, but it will not be required.
See, there's some confusion on our BMEU doesn't seem to accept the mail, only the paperwork, and then they have to go to another location to do their drop for EDDM.
That's really interesting. I'm not as familiar with the rules for dropping off EDDM mail. So if you are dropping off at the facility where the carriers are going out for the day, then you should be able to drop that mail there if all of your mail is destined for that. For those carriers that are serviced out of that center. I know there are some facilities throughout the United States that don't actually have any carriers that go out of them, so that might be what's happening there. If you have further questions with that, I think you should probably call our support department because that sounds like a pretty specific question to your area.
Let's see. Can you talk about saturation and high density discounts for standard mail?
Yeah, so for saturation and high density rates for standard mail, there aren't going to be too many changes there. Now there is going to be a change if you're sending out EDDM flats. You won't be able to use the detached address labels anymore, which kind of makes sense because if you're doing every door direct mail, you're not actually printing out an address on the mail piece. So having a detached address label doesn't make a lot of sense in that case. But other than that, let me take a look at the actual rates for it. I've got them up on a separate screen here. So the prices for carrier out, high density, saturation, and high density plus rates, the rules for those aren't going to change. So you'll have the same thresholds to qualify for those rates. But the actual increases for those rates are not going to be as much as, they're not going to be as high as the 5.9%, but they're just a little bit under.
Okay, our next question is, for new single piece mailed price, can it be paid through a CAPS account?
Yes.
The next one is, will I be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation? Yes, you will be able to. The slide deck as well as the recording of this session will be available on our website within the week or so. Let's see. Will my software reflect changes if we send to an FSS location?
Yeah, and this is again where you'll want to make sure that you're applying those updates as soon as we release them. Like I said, the post office is still clarifying some of the sortation rules to vendors. We've actually got a call later today to try and sort out a couple little details with FSS. And so we're still in the development and testing mode, just making sure that we've got all of our I's dotted and T's crossed when it comes to our software. So, but basically what will happen is based on what's in your mailing, the sort engine will know what to do, and it will prepare those FSS bundles in the correct containers for you. It's just going to change the way that your qualification report looks.
Okay, the next one is, how does one know their mail will go to a FSS location?
So what you can do in order to see if your mail is headed to an FSS location is it's actually based off of your 5-digit zip codes for all of the mail that you're sending out. And you can look that up using the labeling list. So if you go to that Postal Explorer website, pe.usps.gov, there's a link there for labeling lists. And the labeling lists that actually list out all the FSS location is L006. And if you take a look at that, that will list out all of the different zip codes that have an FSS machine.
What does bulk mailer do with running the mail.dat version when a job has already been set up? Does it default to the latest version if that's what was set up previously?
Actually, it will default to the old version because it's going to be set up using the old settings. So, so you will need to go back through the wizard and check the new 14-1 version for any mailing past January 26th. You will be able to use some of the different options using the 13-1 format, but new things like the new incentive for the new QR code format, those won't be available unless you select 14-1.
Does the IMPD apply to the priority mail flat rate envelopes too?
As far as the flat rate envelopes go, I don't believe that that is a requirement unless you're doing them in bulk. So if you're claiming commercial rates for your priority mail, then you would be required to do IMPB. But if you're just doing the retail rates, then you wouldn't need to do that.
Here's a question. I have a question regarding this discount. As the USPS called us with mailers on their dock threatening to refuse our mailer because there was a FSIMB discount listed on the documents that they would not honor.
Okay, so if that sounds like something that was specific to the mailing that you were submitting. Now, depending on which dock you're going to, some of the facilities across the country are better prepared for full service mail than others. If you do claim your full service discount, you do need to submit electronic documentation. You do need to have unique barcodes on all of your mail pieces. So if you did not do that, if you did not submit your electronic documentation and you were using paperwork, so you were actually using printed pages of your postage statement, then that is a cause for them to reject your full service discount. However, they should still take your mail and just take the full service discount away. They shouldn't be rejecting your mail completely. If that's what happened there, please let us know, and we can notify headquarters that that's happening at that facility, and hopefully get them some more training.
Okay, the next one is, if your mailing date determines your rate in Satori bulk mailer, how does that work when running jobs that don't ask for the mail date?
Every job should ask for the mail date, so you do have that option to set the mail date on that the permit selection page in bulk mailer. So you would be selecting that. Now, by default, it's just going to use today, assuming that you're doing a one-off job that you're setting up for today. But if you're preparing any mailing in advance, you'll want to make sure that you select the correct mailing date as you go through the wizard.
On an earlier slide, you had an EDDM promotion featured to start in March 2014. Do you have more information on that?
Oh, that's a good question. So this is, actually, we don't have a lot of information about that EDDM promotion yet. Basically, what I've been told, though, is that this is going to be a promotion for smaller mailers who have not already tried EDDM. So if you are a mail service provider and you're selling to an existing customer that already does EDDM, they wouldn't be eligible. But if you're a mail service provider and you've got a new customer who's never done EDDM and they want to give it a try, then they would be eligible for a coupon that would be anywhere from $50 to $100 off of their very first EDDM mailing. And if you're a mail service provider, you would be able to help request that on behalf of the customer. Or if you're a mailer who's never tried EDDM before, you could request that. However, they are going to be a little bit specific about who they accept for these coupons and who they don't. They only have a limited amount of money that they can give away these coupons on. So, so I definitely would suggest keeping up on, if you actually go to the RIBS website, ribbs.usps.gov, there's a link there for all of the different incentives. And it'll be able to tell you which ones are applied and how and what all the rules are.
Okay, next question, will standard marketing parcels require the IMPB barcode?
Yes, and so that is something that you will need to change here starting on January 26th.
You know when the new statements will be available?
Yeah, so the new postage statements that are actually posted up on the Postal Explorer, they do say draft, which is actually a misnomer. I've actually confirmed with several people at the post office that you can ignore the word draft on all the postage statements that are up on Postal Explorer, and those new postage statements are finalized.
Here's a question. I use bulk mailer. What settings do I need to change during my mail sort section?
Actually, if you're using bulk mailer, we'll actually convert you automatically to the new rules. So you won't actually need to make any changes. There will be some new options, however. So for example, if you're doing first-class letters and you have residual mail and you're doing mixed 1 and 2 ounce pieces, you will have the selection in the advanced sorted settings screen to select whether you're going to combine the 1 ounce and the 2 ounce pieces and claim the combined price, or if you want to separate them and get the separate price for that. So there will be a selection for that. By default, we're just going to go ahead and combine them because that's just going to be one tray, and usually that's a little bit easier. But for the most part, it will just happen automatically. So as soon as you select that mailing date, after you've applied the correct service pack, then everything should sort just fine without any new changes to your settings.
We have another FSS question. With the FSS changes, will the pre-search software produce multiple output files when a single file with the input?
Actually, no. It will consider it all one mailing. It'll just be separating the mail within that mailing into different containers. So you will have one mailing that combines everything, both your FSS mail and your non-FSS mail. But when you take a look at your qualification report, you'll notice that things are in different SACs. You might have a SAC that's called an FSS level instead of a 5-digit level. So things are just going to look a little bit different on your qualification report. But everything will be considered the same mailing.
Is submitting paperwork online still required?
The online submission of paperwork was a requirement for full service. You still can submit using the online options. However, it will not be required.
Are there any minimums to get the meter 1 cent discount?
No, just the ones that apply to the type of account that you're paying with. So for example, if you're using a permit imprint, you do need to have 200 pieces in order to get that permit imprint to apply that discount. However, if you're using a meter, there's no minimum. So it just depends on what the restrictions are for the type of payment that you're using.
We have the Neopost meter machine. Would we be eligible for the 1 cent discount?
Yes, you would.
For FSS, will carrier route processing be mandatory?
No, and so this is kind of an interesting thing, is that actually within FSS Mail, you actually can apply for the carrier route basic and also the carrier route high density and high density plus rates, but the actual order of your mail within that FSS bundle doesn't matter. So this is kind of an interesting thing because it's actually a little bit better for mailers who don't qualify for carrier route rates today because maybe they don't have a walk sequence number, or if they just don't like doing the carrier route preparation because it is a lot of extra work. You have a lot more bundling to do. The order within each bundle is really super important. With FSS Mail, none of that matters. So actually, there are going to be some cases where people who have been doing just automation rate mail for quite a while are going to all of a sudden start actually qualifying for carrier route rates and carrier route high density and high density plus rates just because of the volume of their mail. And so so the preparation for that won't change. So that, I mean, it'll be the new FSS preparation, but those carrier route rates will actually automatically be applied. So this is one of those cases where some mailers will see a reduction in postage, but the actual mail preparation won't change very much. So that's good news.
And our next question, mandatory ISB requirements offered waived annual permit fees for Indicia mail. Does this mean that permit fees are required once again?
No, if you're doing full service mail, and you have 90% or more of all of your mail is being sent as full service, then your permit fees will continue to be waived. So that's still a benefit of full service. And they're not going to be taking that away. They're just not requiring that you do full service.
Is there going to be a different sorting based on first-class letters?
Only for first-class residual, and only if you are claiming that the separate blended rate. So, for example, if you want to separate your 1 ounce and your 2 ounce pieces and claim the separate 1 ounce and 2 ounce prices, then you would have to separate those out into trays, and that would just be for your residual mail. So so that won't be a big change there.
All right. For the new single piece rate, how does the PI have to read? Most of our mail is pre-sort, but will those prices need a different PI?
So for the permit imprint, obviously if most of your mail is pre-sort, then you'll be able to continue to get those pre-sort rates. It's only going to be for that residual mail that you're not claiming either an automation or a non-automation price on. So this would only be for those pieces that fall to the single piece level, and those would need to be labeled as single piece. So if basically anything that you're doing today for your residual mail won't actually change. You'll actually be able to use the same indicia that you do today.
Is there a different sack type for FSS, or is it just a regular sack?
Yes to both, actually. It's a little bit confusing. So basically what the sort engine is going to do is it's going to prepare a bunch of FSS bundles for each scheme. And if there are enough bundles going to an FSS scheme, so an FSS sort run, then it'll actually create a sack that is entirely for that sort run. So there would be a new sort level called an FSS scheme, and that would be applied. Now, if there aren't enough for that, then it would fall to what's called an FSS facility level. So like I said, there's several different runs that FSS machine goes throughout the day. And so if there aren't enough for a scheme, but there are enough that go to that facility, then you would create a facility sack. Now, if you don't have enough for a facility sack, then all of those bundles will carry down into your regular sacks. So in your 5-digit sacks and your 3-digit sacks, things like that, you will see some random FSS bundles showing up in that lower sorted mail as well. So FSS mail winds up everywhere is kind of the answer.
Even though full service is on hold, someone told me that the tray labels and pallet placards must still reflect information as if you were using full service. Is this true?
Yeah, they are retiring the old tray labels. I'm not so sure about the pallet labels, but they are retiring the old tray labels that had the 10-digit barcode. So you will need to migrate just for the labeling of your trays, and we recommend doing that for your pallets as well, transitioning over to the new format, because this does give the post office a little bit more information, and that was actually part of what was approved from the PRC was the transition and the retirement of that old tray label.
These are great questions. We're coming to the top of the hour. We'll answer a few more questions. Feel free to stay on. And like I mentioned before, if we don't get through all of these questions, we'll contact you offline and make sure that all your questions are answered. The next one is, if the indicated mailing date is, is February 5th on electronic submission, but the drop is actually made on February 8th, how is the change handled through electronic filing?
So if you have to change your mailing date, so that mailing drop date, then actually you would have to change your filing with Postal One. So you would need to go through and edit your electronic documentation submission. If you're using bulk mailer, we actually have some new features that we've implemented recently that allow you to make that change pretty easily within the software.
In bulk mailer professional, how do you choose between mail.xml and mail.dat?
For mail.dat, at the end of your sort, there's going to be an option to save your mail.dat file, and then you'll need to use the USPS upload tool in order to upload that mail.dat file to Postal One. If you want to use mail.xml, there's a tab in bulk mailer called Submit, and you would click on that Submit button, and that would allow you to submit your mail.xml submission to Postal One directly from bulk mailer.
All right. The next one is, we want to make the full service transition. However, there seems to be a huge disconnect between the BMEUs and placards requirements. Our BMEU stating placards are always required. USPS and Satori say this isn't the case. The local facilities have said they have no clue. Will there be some sort of clarification on placard forthcoming?
This is a continuing problem, and I appreciate you asking this question, because I bug the post office pretty regularly on this one because they haven't been terribly clear about when pallets are required. So the general requirement is if you have enough mail to require a pallet, based on your mail class and your piece type and the volume of your mail, then yes, the pallet placard would be required. But that is not true for every single mailing. There are mailings that are small enough that do not require pallets. Now, the post office has put together a fact sheet for pallet placarding requirements. It is available on the RIBS website, ribbs.usps.gov, and it's supposed to help clarify when things are required and when they aren't. Now, if our support department is telling you you don't need pallets, then it's probably pretty likely that you don't, because they're very familiar with this fact sheet. They're very familiar with these rules. If you're continuing to get pushback from your BMEU saying that pallets are required, please let us know, and we will contact headquarters and we'll make sure that your BMEU gets the proper training.
When we do a bulk first-class mail, does the new single-piece mail called meter discount include CAPS account holders?
Yes. So basically, it's any time you have an account for payment with the post office. So, so this could be a CAPS account. It could be just a regular meter imprint. It could be an actual permit imprint. It could be any type of an account that you use to make your payment for your mail. Basically, if you're not dropping it off at the blue box in front of the post office, then you're probably going to be eligible for that new meter price.
Okay, and this one will be our last question. I met with my BMEU and they said we had to set up the license holder and bulk mailer. Is that true? What is that information?
I'm not sure what they mean by a license holder. They could mean the mail.dat license ID, or that it's basically the ID Alliance account ID, and that's actually a field that's only required if you're using mail.dat. If you're using mail.xml or the Postal Wizard, then you would not be required to get that license holder information. However, if you do want to use mail.dat, actually Satori software has collected quite a few of these IDs from ID Alliance, and we make them available for free to our customers. So if you do want to use mail.dat and you need an ID Alliance ID, just call our support department or the sales department. They can generate one for you very quickly, and you'll be ready to go.
All right, so that's all the time we have today. I would like to note a couple of things before we wrap up. After the presentation, please take a few minutes to complete our short survey. Your feedback will help us improve the quality of our webinars moving forward. And just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website. You can find this session, along with many others, under the Archive Sessions page, on our Archive Sessions page, under the Learn section of our website. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of the day.